This is No Nonsense Leadership, where we explore better ways to develop software products and services. Join world-class experts for honest insights and practical advice to help you lead digital teams clearly and confidently. Subscribe now to learn the best ideas in the field.
In this episode, we explore how to escape the outdated factory model of software development. We discuss traditional bureaucratic software development, why it fails, and how Agile was meant to fix it by removing departmental silos and liberating talent, only for managers to turn it back into siloed development in sprints. We discuss a successful Agile transformation at a digital agency and use that example to show that good leadership, structural transformation, and a commitment to learning can drive real, successful change. Tune in if you're ready to break the cycle and change things for the better. Welcome to the No Nonsense Leadership Podcast. I'm Murray Robinson.
And I'm Donna Spencer.
So today I wanted to talk about how to escape the outdated factory model of software development, which was a talk I gave to the Project Management Institute Agile group recently. And I thought the best way to do that might be for you to ask me questions about it and we can have a conversation. What do you think?
Yeah, so the place that I wanted to kick this off is by telling a little bit of a story. So I've been working in organisations that do good Agile for a fair while. And one of the things that I've also done in my past is taught Agile for a postgrad short course. One of the things that I realised when I was teaching Agile was that the students would be like, why do we even need to learn this class? This is just what the world works like. And I realised that I would have to go backwards and tell them about the previous world and what Agile was pushing back against. So I thought it might be a good place to start by talking about what Agile was a reaction against. And when the old ways did and didn't work.
Yeah. All right. Well, I started my career in software development in the mid-80s for General Motors, and they had implemented something called Method 1 from Anderson Consulting, which is now called Accenture.
Right.
And the developers called it methadone because it put everybody to sleep. It came in 12 thick binders and it was very slow and ponderous and there was an enormous amount of documentation. And that sort of approach became very prevalent throughout the 80s and 90s, and I think it still exists today under different guise. The business people would say, we need to change this system. And the first thing they would have to do is a brief. They'd write that up. There'd be some sort of business approval process. And then a project manager gets appointed and IT business analysts would be allocated to it. And they would talk to your stakeholders and produce an 80-page requirements document. You had to talk about the functional requirements and the non-functional requirements and the goals and the users and the data. And everybody you talk to is putting everything from their wish list in on the basis that this is their one chance for the next 10 years. And you do Moscow, a must have, should have, could have, would have, and everything is must have. The next thing is it goes to an architect. They produce a big architecture document, usually about 80 pages, quite often really terrific to read and beautiful and makes so much sense. They discuss it amongst themselves. Then that gets approved, and we've spent 3 months probably so far, and nobody has any idea about what anything's going to cost or how long it's going to take. After that, it goes to the UI design team who develop a user interface design for the new system based on the business requirements without doing any user experience research or talking to users at all. It's simply based on design models and design frameworks that the business stakeholders like. And then it goes to a more serious costing process where your project manager gets vendors to estimate it, tell us how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take to deliver all of this, everything written in these documents, fixed scope, fixed price. and the vendors get another 6 weeks and they'll come back with some sort of big estimate. Around the same time, the business case is being written, which is the request for funding from the business side. So the project manager's writing that with the business sponsors, and they can't finish it till they get a cost from the vendor. Everybody makes up figures in order to get the business case across the line. It's just a story you tell to get funding. It'll get done because there's an executive who wants it to get done, but it's got to go through all the finance people. So you've spent, by this stage, 9 to 12 months, and you've already spent millions of dollars. Then the vendor gets engaged. It's usually a big company that outsourced to India. Then they will generally bring a small team of people to work with you locally. And then there's 3 months of technical design. And when the vendors first engage, you engage your own small test team and they create test cases. So they go through the requirements and say, this is how we're going to test this. And then the vendor start to develop. And typically they say it'll take 3 months. It never takes 3 months. It takes 9 months. So they start working on it and it goes into a black hole. Nobody knows what's going on. You get all these reports saying it's going great. You have no idea because you don't see what they're doing and you're not allowed to talk to the people doing the work. So while they've gone into a black hole, your test team is developing all these test cases for user acceptance testing. And then after 3 months, they're supposed to be giving you stuff and they say, it's not ready. It's not our fault. It's because of this other thing that somebody in your team didn't do. And that continues on and on and on. And then there's a whole series of escalations. And then stuff starts to trickle over. So it's been through their development team and then they've put it through their quality assurance team. And then you have it for what's called user acceptance testing, which you will have budgeted for 3 months. So you'll set up your own team. You've got your business analyst, your architect, your project manager, your quality manager, and you might hire a couple of quality testers and rope in some business people. And they start to test things and find it's absolute garbage coming back. Even though it's been through their test team, you could guarantee that everything is always 1/3 broken. And what that means is that quite often a problem will bounce 10 times and you'll have this enormous log of defects. You're already quite late and over budget by this point, and your test cases are failing everywhere and they're logging thousands of defects and things just go on and on and on and it just becomes hellish. This hellish cycle of everything is wrong all the time, everything is shit, and there's all these escalations and the vendors managers are all lying to you about what's going on, and you try and work out what the hell is going on, and it turns out that their super experienced team are all bunch of juniors, and in order to get things going, they've told their test team that they have to pass things even if they don't pass. Also, during this user acceptance testing, you find out that a lot of the requirements are wrong. Not only were they written 2 years ago, but they're all based on a bunch of people say, oh, it should do this and it should do that. Things have changed in the market. Processes have changed in the organization. And also, they were just simply wrong about what the business rules and processes were. So you discover this then. So there's a lot of changes that arise. People have forgotten there's an important dependency. The architects forgot about it, or they didn't know about it, or there was all this infrastructure work to be done with servers and firewalls and things that everybody thought should be done in 3 months, but it actually takes the infrastructure team 12 months because they've all outsourced it to a vendor in India as well and have got huge delays in their process. So it's really difficult and everyone's expected to work late nights and weekends. And then you slog your way through the defects and you get down to maybe a couple of hundred and you say, that's good enough, we'll put it into production. There's no showstoppers. User experience design, it's the absolute last thing on the list of priorities. So then you put it in with all these known defects. And the first thing that happens is it falls over in production, usually because the data you expected to get from other systems isn't what you thought it would be. And the integrations aren't what you thought they would be, or nobody really understood it, or there's lots of assumptions about the data which are wrong. You can see what's happening here is that things don't get found out until right at the very end. So it's in production, you've deployed it, you've taken your old system off, you've got the new one on, and it doesn't work. So then you spend 3 months with the entire team just crazily fixing it to make it work. And gradually starts to work and the problems get fixed. And after about 3 months, it's okay. And that's when you discover for the first time that people hate it, that it's difficult to use. Ease of use was something that you wrote in your business case and your requirements, and then everybody forgot about it.
Oh, but it was in the non-functional bit.
Yeah. So once you get past this and you start to fix some of the usability issues, then you discover that it doesn't meet any of the business goals at all. You've just built this big thing and there's no improvement to sales or engagement or profit or uptake or cost reduction, all these things in your business case. And the reason is nobody paid any attention to that whatsoever during the project. So you've probably gone 2 years, you're 50% over time and over budget. Lots of projects go 3 times over time with budget, but you don't find out until after this enormous investment that it doesn't actually achieve the business goals that you wanted. That is called the software development life cycle or the system development life cycle or the technical development process or something like that. That's my experience of it, and I think most people's experience of it.
Yeah, through that period, I was working a lot in government. So I was often an internal designer in government and I would get that big requirements doc. Whether they were outsourcing the development or not, often the design would get done inside. So I'd get that enormous requirement doc and go and get told to design the system. And I'd do all the design and you show people their designs and they freak out because the designs aren't what they think. And there's at least a chance of catching the fact that it isn't what people imagined. But often I found that it had been estimated, it had been budgeted, it had been promised. So they were still going to bloody deliver it no matter what. Even if you find out at that point that people are like, no, that's not what we want. They're like, no, sorry, this is what we're building. So then you'd go for another year, they'd actually build it and all those things would happen.
I have to say, one good thing about these sort of projects is that they have a strict change control process. That's a really big part of it. So the idea is that the scope is fixed up front. It doesn't matter if it's wrong. It's what everybody agreed to. There's no such thing as the scope was wrong. The whole idea is that the scope has changed. But as you're finding all of these defects, the vendor is saying everything is a change request because it's how they make their money. They'd always underestimate to win some deal. And then they would charge you an absolute fortune on your change requests. I saw one project by a very big service provider where a change came through that was mandatory and they estimated it would take 30 days of effort to do. And the architect on the client side went to a training session where they were learning how to configure the system, and he worked out he could make the change himself in half an hour and it didn't take 30 days. So that's how heavy the process is.
I will say there were times when this would work for me. I was often doing website designs for government, and because they were fairly known and predictable, I could help with that requirements gathering, do some upfront design, and then the team would build them out fairly predictably because it was known. It wasn't like dealing with all the crazy unknowns of a really complex software system.
Yeah. Well, if you were a business analyst, which I was for 10, 12 years, it was actually a really good process. You did good work, you talked to a lot of people, you got agreement on everything, and then that was it. Your part of the project was finished. You can go on to something else. You didn't have to worry about the implementation. The BA, the architect, the designer, they did their part and then they went away onto something else. They weren't involved in the nitty-gritty of making it work. So it was very siloed.
All right, so how is Agile meant to fix all of this?
So Agile was really a revolution against this from a group of software development consultants who were super frustrated with it. And so a group of people working in project management, architecture, design, software development, from what's called the lightweight process community, the object-oriented design and development community, said we can find better ways of developing software products and services by doing it and helping others do it. And since we've been doing that for quite a long time, we've realized heavy processes and tools are not helping, they're getting in the way. And so we think that it's more important to focus on the people in the team and how they're working together. And all this heavy documentation isn't really helping us that much. It's better to focus on getting some software working really early and testing it out to see if we're right. or not. And in these projects, we also have these enormous fights about what's in scope and what's out of scope. It's much better to focus on working closely with our customers and stakeholders to work out what they want than arguing with lawyers about contract breaches. And then following these plans, which are fixed up front, always leads to these awful results. Yeah, things get delivered, usually, but with an enormous amount of pain and over budget and over time. And then we find out that people didn't like it and it doesn't make us any money, doesn't achieve our business goals. So we'd be much better off focusing on learning and then implementing the things we learn as we go. So I think at its core, there's this idea that things are uncertain. In the corporate world, there's this belief that you should be able to nail down everything up front. You should be able to nail down the requirements, get them approved, and they'll be right, and there'll be no reason to change them, or any change would be minor. Same with the UI design. But in reality, I would say that probably about 30% of everything we do up front turns out to be wrong. And we could spend 2 years trying to get it better, and it won't make any difference. Whether we spend a month on the requirements or 12 months is not going to make any difference. It's always going to be about 30% wrong. When I say wrong, it's not like the business analysts wrote it down wrong. I mean that the business people were wrong about what the users wanted. And they were wrong about the business rules, or they made assumptions, or you misunderstood them, or the architecture was wrong, or the data wasn't what you thought, or the interfaces are not what you thought, or you forgot stuff. Another way of saying it is change. There's going to be at least 30% change in every aspect of the things you do up front because you're going to learn more as you go. And Agile is saying, well, that's inevitable, and we work with that by learning it as quickly as possible by testing things out. And what's really odd these days when you talk to people about Agile, they go, oh yeah, that's sprints and stand-ups.
Yeah.
Scrum is an Agile framework, but doing sprints and stand-ups doesn't make you Agile at all. Very far from it.
Yeah. I mean, they might be a little bit better talking to your team daily to every couple of days rather than 3 months apart in a waterfall process, but it's not experimenting, trying things, figuring out where you're wrong. Getting things visible really fast so that people can go, oh, I actually didn't realize that's what it meant. So like proper Agile is amazing. Being able to work quickly, experiment, turn things around, figure out like what you don't know early, etc. I work in a place that does that style of proper Agile, and I've done it in a couple of places in the past. So when I think about Agile, I really do think about experimenting, being quick, working together, not documenting things and handing them to other people, but getting on a call and chatting through stuff. But when I see people talk about Agile, and when I talk to you about it, I realize that Agile in implementation, particularly in large-ish organizations, is what I imagine in my head. I know you've got a lot of experience with this. So what has gone wrong?
What's happened is that managers in organizations have turned Agile into the opposite of itself. That said, how do we do what we were already doing with Agile words and processes? So, for example, what I was just talking about with waterfall is siloed. There are phases and gates. Everybody says they've got to do Agile. So what will happen is in the requirements phase, the business analysts will write user stories in 2-week sprints, but they'll still work in isolation and they'll still write big requirements documents, and they'll have lots of user stories, and they tend to get quite fragmented because they're not designed to be part of a great big thing. Around the same time, the architecture team will be writing their architecture, and they'll do it in a traditional way because they love doing their big models and diagrams and documents. You probably get your vendor more involved earlier these days, but senior management are absolutely determined that we have to define all this scope up front because they believe you can do it accurately, and they think it's absolutely necessary to get the budget correct. They don't want to change the budget, but they always do, but they don't want to. And they have this very strong belief amongst management, especially senior management, that it is possible to define everything up front if you try hard enough. And so they make everybody try and define everything up front. So you've still got silos and phases and gates. It's just that you do things in sprints and you have stand-ups and you use agile words and you do user stories. It tends to make it all much more fragmented though, if you do a traditional approach using that way. And then one of the things the vendors love about agile is that it's time and materials. That it's not fixed price, fixed scope anymore. They have successfully persuaded corporates that they can put in a lower bid if they can say it's a time and materials thing based on what you've said. In that case, what you're doing as a vendor is you're paying for a team for a period of time. And they'll be pretty evasive about what the team is. They'll have their development team silo offshore, and they'll have a test team silo for themselves, which will follow along afterwards. And then the vendor will have the development team work for months in sprints without you knowing what they're doing. I guess it's more overlapping than it used to be. That's probably one of the differences. The phases overlap about halfway through, but it's still very siloed. And then it comes back to you in your user acceptance testing. And it's exactly the same terrible quality that you used to get. And exactly the same big overruns in time and cost and everybody running around blaming each other and this huge hellscape of everyone having to work long hours and attacking and undermining each other and blaming everyone else. And then when it goes into production, exactly the same thing happens as before. There's all shit and a disaster. And so there hasn't really been much of a change in process. I would say actually it's got worse than it was because there's no change management anymore. When you do this corporate agile process, the business people have this idea that, we can change whatever we want, whenever we want. So they just start firing things in as they learn stuff. And it just goes into a list and nobody knows what the effect is. The vendor likes it because they're getting paid for all their hours. There's no risk to them and their work just keeps growing and growing and growing. And so if they deliver terrible quality and have to do things 10 times, that's okay with them because you're paying for them to do it 10 times. And they also still do the same stuff where they don't let you talk to the developers or their quality people because they don't want you to know that they don't know what they're doing and that they've lied to you about their skills and experience. So the offshore model is we're going to have 50 junior people. We're going to have 5 mid-level people who are the tech leads. So it's very typical for you to find that most of the people working on your project don't really know what they're doing and do everything quite poorly. So they are very inexperienced teams, very bottom heavy with juniors. Eventually it gets done, but it's really awful. And I've referred you to a Reddit post where somebody was saying, we're using Agile, but I don't understand when are we going to be finished this project? I'm looking at all these metrics and I can see the dev team says 80% done. The DevOps team say they've deployed 77% of it into our environment. Our UAT team says that they've done 55%, and the business say they've tested 90% of the things that the UAT people have given to them and passed them. The vendor says their velocity is 13 points per sprint. So when is it going to be done? The thing is, they're not doing Agile at all because they're working in silos. And realistically, the only way to work out when you're going to be done is to look at how many things have actually been finished each week and put a forecast line on that and project it against how many things you got left to do.
Yeah, when I read that Reddit post, it was really clear that it was all upfront stuff. So there was upfront requirements, there was upfront design. So it totally was the waterfall project chopped into sprints.
Yeah. So I would say 90% of corporate Agile is like that.
Yeah. Because I always see so much on LinkedIn that says Agile is rubbish. And I'm always like, just really good. But I haven't worked many places where it's waterfall chopped into sprints with daily stand-ups. Is it fixable? Do we need to come up with another thing that's actually really experimental?
If corporate management wanted to fix it, they could fix it, but they don't want to. I think Agile has followed the same path that the quality movement has, that lean production has. So American car makers were being beaten by Japanese car makers who developed a far superior way of working, which was around small cross-functional teams, continually improving the way they work, highly trained, highly skilled people stop the line, the end-on cord. The idea of the end-on cord is if you're putting doors on a car and you find that they are not going on properly because there's been a problem early in the production process, a supervisor comes over, and if they say it means we can't put the doors on properly, we stop this whole section of the assembly line and we go back and we resolve the real problem at its root cause before we go on, because we don't want these things to go through to the end and have to be fixed then. And then Kanban came out of that. Kanban is minimal supplies just in time. It's all the stuff about working closely with your vendors. Anyway, it made Toyota and those companies far more cost-effective, far more high quality. And then when they came to America, because of tariffs, they took over the NUMMI plant, which was GM's worst plant, and they implemented all their approaches and they fixed it. It became the most productive GM plant in America because it was a co-op between GM and Toyota. And then all those GM managers who worked through that plant went and tried to implement it everywhere else, and they failed. They failed miserably because all of the corporate philosophy, the corporate structure, the corporate rules, the fundamental beliefs about managers' rights and workers and unions and everything was opposed to that they couldn't do it. And it's only been the 2000s that the American companies have really been able to implement this stuff. So it's taken them a very long time, and they've slowly implemented stuff against great internal opposition from their management and senior management teams and their workers and their unions. They've always been way behind what Toyota can do. But you remember during the 2008 GFC, a lot of those car companies had to be bailed out by the government. It's only when they were facing bankruptcy that they really started to get serious about changing. And I just think that this is such a big change to the way that management think, that instead of implementing Agile, they've turned Agile into what they were already doing.
Yeah. Michele, when we talked to him recently, told us stories about organisations that had changed dramatically, but it involved senior management doing workshops and training and really changing the way they thought. But that one's all been done. So yeah, it's that people don't want to do it in a different way.
Corporations are set up like a machine. They're based on the Taylorist model, on Theory X. Managers get promoted throughout their career by learning how to follow the system and accept all of the beliefs and values of the corporate machine. You're trying to build and improve the machine, but the fundamental assumptions remain the same. When people introduce Agile, they're doing it largely because that's the thing you do. Everybody has to be Agile. Who wouldn't want to be Agile? Who wouldn't want to be adaptive? We look around and we see all of these Silicon Valley companies making a huge amount of money, and they're all Agile, and a lot of them really are to some extent. And the big management consulting companies are coming in and saying, if you implement Agile, we can cut your costs by 15% across the board. But they don't really want to change. The managers don't want to change their authority. They don't want to change their beliefs. They don't want to change their assumptions about things like we can design everything up front. So what can you do? Well, it takes strong leadership support from the top, and it takes usually some sort of crisis. I can tell you a story of when I've successfully done. So I was invited to join a digital agency which had about 100 people that were in quite a lot of trouble. They had divided their organization up into sales and delivery. Sales was called performance marketing, strategy and account management and user experience design, but it was all under the sales arm. And then delivery was, we've signed the contract, now you have to deliver it. And the problem they were having was that all of their projects were unprofitable except for their one big Agile project that they were doing for a big charity organization that had said to them, we want to work in an Agile way. So that was making money because it was effectively time and materials. But not only that, the outcomes were great. The client was very happy with the results. The results were fantastic. They were very successful in growing and doing well and the team was happy and everybody was happy. Then you had a bunch of other projects sitting in the middle that were not making money but not losing money and being done in a fairly traditional way. And the relationships with the clients were adversarial. There was a lot of argument about change control and change management and so on. And then you had the majority of projects were losing massive amounts of money because performance marketing, this was what they called their sales team, had massively underestimated everything so that they could win a sale. And then they'd washed their hands of it and given it to the delivery team. Ultimately, it was the CEO's fault. He had encouraged this and supported it and put people in who took this approach. So after I joined, I was told, you've got 6 months to turn delivery around or we're going to close it all down, except for this one project that's making money. We're going to have to shut it down. And you've got 50 developers, BAs and QA people and project managers who are all going to lose their jobs. But don't tell anybody. So I trained our teams on Agile. I went and talked to the clients and said, this is how we're going to work now. Scope is going to be flexible. You have a team. So we've got beyond the point of delivering our minimum scope. Now we're in the area where we're arguing about change. So I want to move to a model where we agree that you're going to pay us this amount for this team each month, and we're going to put everything you want to do onto a backlog and we'll prioritize it with you. So you'll be in control all the time. When the money runs out, we stop. There'll be things we can't do, but that's okay because you'll have got your most important things first. And we'll have you very involved in the process all the way through. So you're making the decisions and there won't be this horrible change management process anymore. But you can't come back to us and say, no, there was all these other things in the document that we want for free. And if you do that, we're going to say no. They all agreed. And then at the same time, I restructured all of our teams. So there will be people with analysis skills, design skills, development skills, testing skills, deployment skills. They're all going to be in these cross-functional teams. And each customer will have its own team of, say, 8 people with all these skills and a project manager. And they are going to work very closely together in this way. And we're going to have lots of open communication, and the project manager knows that they have to stick to a budget. Just say to the client, you can have this much capacity each month for this much money. Now, what do you want to do with it? And I've spent a lot of time with the clients and the project managers and other people negotiating it. Anyway, stable cross-functional teams focused on clients. I trained everybody, trained the clients, changed the rules, changed the process, and it worked really, really well. The clients were really happy with it. The teams were much happier. There was less unpaid overtime and the results were good. If the client came up with an idea while we were working, we could do it really quickly and some of those paid off really well for them. And all of those unprofitable but recoverable projects all became profitable. And the one which was a nightmare because it had been massively overpromised finished after 6 months. From then on, every project was profitable. We did have some trouble selling to clients who wanted to have a guaranteed scope up front, but some clients, particularly government clients, we had to say we can't work like that. We had government clients say, we work in the Agile way, and then they give us this process we had to follow, which was just standard siloed system development cycle with commitments to scope up front. And we said, we can't do that. So we had things we had to walk away from. And our sales team were not happy about that. But on the other hand, we won major new clients like Twitter and other companies that made a big difference. And I feel like we did much better work. But the other thing that happened was that the people who'd been making these big promises that we couldn't deliver on, I had to discuss it with our senior executive team and say, this is what's happening. We can't allow them to make any promises anymore. And the result was that they felt disempowered and a lot of them left. And actually that made things much better because they'd been blaming all the delivery people for the problems they were causing. So most of them left. We kept the core sales people, and then sales and the senior delivery people worked very closely together on pitches and selling. So we were promising stuff that we knew we could deliver. I set up this whole rapid planning process where we could plan a project in 2 to 4 weeks by doing a whole lot of prototypes. During a planning process, we would talk to real customers and real users.
Fancy that.
We would put prototypes in front of them and say, what do you think? What can we learn from you? And the architects were doing investigations, prototyping integrations. I've talked about this in detail before in one of our earliest episodes, but we worked out a way to get the whole team to work with the whole client's team to plan and estimate projects in 2 to 4 weeks. Instead of spending 9 months, we could do it in less than a month. And some of our clients loved it, and that's how we won quite a bit of work. One major client tried to get his organization to change to work in this way, and they couldn't. As soon as I started discussing it with their senior management, their CIO got really prickly, and for me to say things like, well, we can't know all the requirements up front, it's impossible, got an angry response back from the CIO. So it's possible, but senior leadership at the executive level have to be willing to understand it and sponsor it and support it. Working in agile ways, there's a big change to work in cross-functional teams and accepting that uncertainty is inevitable in building anything new. It can be done. People do it successfully. But generally speaking, management resist any real change because it goes against their mental models of how organizations work. They can't even understand it.
I suspect this is why it's harder to do in-house than it is in that consulting model, because in that consulting model, that barrier between the client and the vendor is where you can put the pressure on. But I imagine this is what we're going to talk about with guests over the next amount of time as well. See what we can hear about places that have made it work.
We've had a few people on recently talking about different types of organizations like Bertsorg and Hire. We've just finished talking to Mikhail from Humanocracy. Agile is very similar to those sort of modern organizations where we're talking about empowered teams, skilled teams. They build up their own capability. They trust their people. They have very low management overhead. Agile's a lot like that. It's got its own name and it's going through a bad place at the moment, but it's part of something bigger. It feels to me like the French Revolution when people were introducing democracy. You've got the aristocracy in the senior management who know that they have to change, that things are not good, that things are not working. But in France, they didn't have the revolution until the French monarchy went nearly bankrupt and they had this terrible famine. So revolutions always come during famines and bankruptcies and crises. The aristocracy is not going to change unless they're forced to, because they might lose their power and their wealth and their privilege. So Agile is a big change like that. But what's better, if you are the aristocracy, is just to use the words without actually changing anything. And that's what corporate Agile is for most places. My talk to the Project Management Institute was 90% of you who think you're doing Agile today are not, because you're working in silos instead of in cross-functional teams, and your scope is fixed up front instead of being adaptive. And also, you aren't testing and measuring and learning as you go. Let's say you're a bank and it takes 6 weeks to approve a mortgage, and your goal is to do it in 4 weeks. Well, if you're going to be agile, you would say, let's set it up with an alternative process that we can put a small number of people through, and let's see. We've gone from 6 weeks to 5.5 weeks to 5 to 4.5 to 4 by making changes progressively as we go.
Well, let's figure out what stops it from being able to be done.
Yeah, we can map out some processes and work out where the blockers are and do some value stream analysis, but let's test it and say, okay, let's change this because we think it's a blocker. I've done this in projects. I've been responsible for performance improvement projects in systems. And people will map out value streams and processes and say, here's the blocker. And you remove the blocker and nothing changes.
And nothing happens.
Why? Because it just uncovers another blocker. You remove that blocker and what happens? Nothing. Why? Because they were actually wrong about that anyway. No point in doing huge plans up front. What's much better is to say, we think it's these things. How can we test each one? How can we try it and see if it fixes it? Did that, didn't work. Did that, didn't work. Did that, oh, that worked. We got 10% towards our goal. Well, let's do the next one. You go through a few rounds of that. Eventually, you get all the way to your goal. And that's how you work in the Agile way. But I was sitting next to somebody who was a director of a big program team at a bank that are well known for having gone through an Agile transformation. And they're still working in silos with big scope up front and big bang implementation at the end. And they don't test, measure, and learn as they go. So it's just the same as before, but with lots of Agile words, which is disappointing.
It is disappointing.
It's no wonder that Agile's got a bad name, because people are just basically doing the same as they were before, but in a more chaotic way, and saying it's terrible. Well, it was always terrible, and you're not doing Agile. And that's what Agile is designed to address.
That makes a lot of sense.
What else do you want to ask me, Donna?
Well, I asked you how we can fix it.
Leadership, big changes, lots of training. Get some real serious coaches who've got lots of practitioner experience in. We've talked to so many people in our podcast from all over the world who have this enormous amount of value to add. Invest in building your capability as an organization and get these world experts to come in. They're not that expensive. Whatever you do, don't get McKinsey, BCG, Bain, Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG. They are super expensive. The people you get don't really know what they're talking about. Like this big bank in Australia that's well known for its Agile transformation. A guy worked for me, shared a house with one of those consultants. He said to him one day, I hear you're doing Agile at your agency. Can you tell me all about it? Because I'm going into this big bank next week as an Agile expert and I don't know what it is. They're reading a book on the plane to the engagement as an Agile expert.
That's terrible. I don't know how to ask questions that are going to make us more positive.
There are organizations that are doing it really well. Spotify, genuinely really good. Facebook seems to be really good with technical agility. They may not do Scrum anymore. Google, really good on technical agility and continuous delivery. Amazon, we had a guy from there and they are doing traditional big design and requirements up front in their product team, but I think they're doing the technical agility part. How do you do it? Look, I'm a firm believer that if you get a cross-functional team together to work on something and you do retrospectives, then the team will tell you everything you need to know to fix your broken system so you can get things done. The team will say, here's some things that are stopping us that are in our control, and this is what we're going to do about it. But then here's all these other problems outside our control. We're dependent on this other group for data, and they're not giving it to us. Or their documentation is shit, or we need this skill set and the recruitment process is taking months. If you as management listen to your teams, then those teams will tell you how to systematically improve your organization to remove the blockers that are preventing them from achieving your goals. So if you did that with every team and your management focused on removing blockers at a systemic level, then you would have really big changes in your organization across 12 months. Now, there is a trap here because removing a local blocker leads to a local optimization. So a local team can organize things so it suits them to perform well, but that can cause a lot of problems for other people. So you need to have a scaling process where the issues from each team come up to the next level for managers to sort out and remove blockers. And then that program team should be part of a bigger team. And so you should have problems cascading up the organization to the very top, where each level is improving things in the system as they can, but then things they can't tackle have to go up to the next level and they fix them systematically, and then they can go all the way up to the CEO. So if you did that, that would make a big difference. But you can see at the same time from the top down, you got to have the leadership to say, this is what we're going to do. And maybe you start with one area. I like the idea of starting with the customer teams, because if you have teams of people who are working directly with customers in call centers or in customer support, I mean, after all, it is your customers who are paying you. So you should try and make things easy for them and listen to them We had the guy from Vanguard Consulting saying they start with the call center dealing with customers and they focus on their experience and removing waste and delays so that they can meet their needs more effectively. They bring in a small team of software developers, analysts, designers. They sit in the call center, they work with people, and they have a goal at the executive level, and the goal will be reduce mortgage processing times from 6 weeks down to 4 weeks or something. And they work with customers to just improve the process, test, measure, learn, cross-functional teams, listening to customers, voice of the customer. If you start there and you genuinely, as a leader, listen to the things they tell you, it will lead to systematic changes throughout your entire organization. If you are brave enough, and it's going to take some pretty serious leadership at the top level to encourage people to be brave, because everybody's too afraid. I remember I was in a program meeting where the business people were strongly encouraging us to raise issues that they could work on to improve. And I raised an issue, and then the program manager, who was standing beside the business person, punished me for it because that was embarrassing to him. I had my contract cancelled a couple of months later. Lots of us have had those sort of experiences.
Yeah, because if you push problems up, then each of those people has to be brave to say, I can't fix this thing, I need to escalate it. And that takes organisation culture and bravery to say, I can't do this, you need to help with this one.
It takes what's called generative leadership, which we talked about with Ron Westrom. Let's say senior management have decided you're going to outsource all your software development to Vietnam, and the people in Vietnam are very inexperienced and causing a lot of problems. So you want to go through and say, these are the good ones, these are the ones who are not so good, we want to cut half of them. So you want to raise it with your manager. Now, what if your manager rips you apart because he was the one who told the business people that the vendor was great and it's going to save a lot of money? Obviously, that problem's not going to be solved. So you need leadership at the top who are prepared to say, yeah, let's fix these problems, and to have the humility to be able to say, everybody gets things wrong, let's just learn from it. You can't have people in those senior levels who got there by lying to everybody, which unfortunately happens enough to be a problem. But if you've got good generative leadership, or even you just get rid of the most toxic people, you can do it. The way I think of it is objectives come down and problems come up. The job of the board and the CEO and the executive team is to say, here's our high-level goals. They have a wide but shallow view, which is good for setting big goals. And they should come down to teams. But then the teams are the ones who are on the ground dealing with real customers and real systems and the business processes. The teams are the ones who know what's really going on. So if they're saying this vendor is not good, we want to go to a different vendor, they are in the best position to do that. And that information needs to be going up and then acted on. So I think if leaders think of themselves as pushing goals down in a mission command way, and then systematically solving problems and removing blockers for the teams as they come up, if you actually had that culture, you could make massive positive changes in 12 months, which would lead to a great liberation of efficiency and talent. I'm quite optimistic about it. Even though a lot of traditional management is bad and I criticise it, I'm actually quite optimistic about most of the people themselves. It's the selfish politicians in management who tend to cause the dysfunction. All right, well, do you want to summarise what you've heard, and I'll maybe just do a final comment on that?
Yeah, we covered today 30 years of software development, what things used to look like. The bad old days of big upfront requirements, big upfront design, waterfall processes, throwing documents over the wall, which is what we used to call it, and how difficult that was to do software. With the upfront process, you start something and it takes so long that by the time it's implemented, it's a couple of years later, and the world has changed, and potentially the requirements weren't the right requirements in the first place anyway. So that's really one of the things that Agile was a reaction to, particularly that super heavy process where people didn't talk to each other. And we talked about how Agile is a good acknowledgement that there's a lot of uncertainty, that we don't know which parts we don't know about, we don't know which of the 30% of our ideas are wrong, and that being able to experiment, do things in smaller chunks with good cross-functional teams means we'll find those 30% of things that are wrong a lot faster. And then we talked about how current corporate Agile really looks like our good old waterfall software development lifecycle process, but just cut into slices with people talking to each other a bit more and maybe a vendor being a bit more involved, but still a lot of upfront thinking, a lot of fixed scope and very siloed. And so then we talked about the ways of fixing it, but that to make software delivery work well needs strong leadership, a lot of listening to each other, really good cross-functional teams that contain all the skills, chopping apart the silo, talking more to each other, listening to customers, listening to the teams who know the things. You have optimism. I always have optimism. It's my state of being. It's why I'm always surprised that people go like, oh, no, this stuff doesn't work. So I'm like, really? But that's why I can't always see what the world looks like. I'm overly optimistic sometimes. But I'm looking forward to talking to more people about this over the next chunk of time with you and learning more about how strong leadership helps all of this work.
Yeah. Well, I guess this is why we're calling our podcast the No Nonsense Leadership Podcast, because we started off talking about the Agile stuff, and before long, we realized that design and product management were crucial to getting any sort of results. Then it all boils down to leadership and organization models. So we spend a lot of time talking about that. And we've made a lot of connections to all of the other movements, Mission Command and a lot of other things people are doing, because Agile is just part of a bigger wave of people saying the Taylorist factory model works in a mass production scenario. If you want to make 1,000 chocolate bars exactly the same every minute, then the Taylorist model and mindset works. But we have discovered in software development, in product development, and in design that whenever you're going to do anything new and different, there's a lot of uncertainty. And when there's a lot of uncertainty, the factory model doesn't work. The factory model is all designed around removing all the uncertainty, standardizing everything, driving all the costs out. You can't do that when you're building new products and services, and any attempts to do that have a very negative effect on your outcome. That's what's very surprising for corporate management. They cannot get their heads around the idea that trying to turn their product development team into a factory makes all their problems much worse, and that in fact we need a whole new approach. The factory mindset is only good when you're doing mass production of the same thing, and it's very anti-innovative, and frankly, it's just not good enough anymore in this age where we're a very open international community with a lot of change and a lot of competition. We're not in the stage where we were after World War II, where there was a big shortage of things and companies just had to produce them in bulk and then they could get people to buy them. It's not like that anymore. We have a lot of choice. There's a lot of products. People can use Square instead of one of the local banks and so on. I think the big corporates are all slowly declining, slowly losing market share, slowly going downhill. So there's an evolutionary pressure to change, and yet there's very strong resistance from the entrenched aristocracy at the top of organizations. And they've co-opted Agile by turning it into the opposite of itself, but using the same words. And now, unfortunately, the majority of people who think they're doing Agile are just actually doing typical old-fashioned corporate system software development, but in sprints with stand-ups, what's called water scrum fall. And I guess the takeaway I would like people to get from this discussion is think about what you're doing. If you think you're doing Agile, but you're working in silos with a big design up front and it's going badly, which it will be, don't blame Agile for that, because you're not doing Agile. You're doing a typical 90s corporate software development lifecycle with Agile words. try doing some real Agile. And that's all about empowering teams, listening, improving the system, removing blockers, listening to customers.
Yeah, listening to your customers, listening to your staff who actually know what the blockers are, especially like that call center customer. They're telling you what's wrong, why it doesn't work for them. They're telling you why they don't understand it.
Yeah. So I am critical. I've been told I'm too critical of management and I'm not going to get a consulting gig because I'm too critical. But ultimately, I'm actually really optimistic that there's a lot of talent and energy amongst your people at all levels, right up into management and leadership, that you're just not using, that you're oppressing. I mean, these cultures of fear are hell to work in. They don't have to be like that. Just find your toxic corporate politicians amongst your management team and fire them. I reckon 40% of any organization's management are what I would call takers. They are extracting value from the teams that they're responsible for and the organization so that they can increase their power and their status and their control. Fire all those people and start doing some of the things we're talking about. Find the givers. So it's not about being a pleasing, always agreeable person. Those do not make good managers either. You want somebody who is trying to make things better for their team, trying to help the organization achieve its objectives by systematically improving it. So look, I'm optimistic and pessimistic at the same time. The proof we're seeing out there is that if you do it properly, it works well. But there's a lot of fakery and most of it is pretty bad, but you can do it. So keep trying.
Find some givers.
All right. So I've referred to quite a lot of other episodes we've talked about. So people should go and listen to those. And we've even done some on dealing with corporate politics recently.
Yeah, we have.
So they'll give you some advice on how to get things through. So I think maybe we've come to the end, Donna.
I think so for today.
All right.
Yeah.
Good. It's been a good discussion.
Excellent. A nice way to do it too.
All right. Thanks, Donna.
All right. See you next time.
See you next time.
That was No Nonsense Leadership from Murray Robinson and Donna Spencer. If you'd like to explore better ways to develop software products and services, contact Donna on LinkedIn and Murray at evolve.co. That's Evolve with a 0. Thanks for listening.